The RPE podcast is a podcast where two physiotherapists and a strength coach sit down and talk all things rehabilitation and sports medicine in the musculoskeletal setting. This show is suitable for all healthcare providers, including new and experienced strength and conditioning coaches, physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, and also students of any allied health profession who are interested in the management of athletes and the general population. On the show, we aim to try and make sense of all of the evidence and present it in an easy and practical way that tries to bridge the gap in each of our respective knowledge bases. The views and opinions on this show are our own and should not be taken as firm medical advice.
Welcome back to the RPE podcast. So today we're going to be talking through ACL rehab. So we'll be using some of the principles that we've talked about previously and just applying it to the context of ACL. So we're very privileged to have Tim on here. So Tim Rowland's going to be blowing our mind on all things ACL, which is good. We got Connor down there as well. So do you just want to quickly say hi, Connor, and then we'll let Tim introduce himself?
Hey everyone, it's good to be back. It's been a little while since we did one of these.
That's right. We'll be back for a few more now. So
pretty
awesome.
Exciting.
And we could have at some stage joining us a temporary co-host who was begging to get on, but then kind of has left us hanging, and that's Kurt. So if you get someone come up later, we might have another person on as well to give the strength coach perspective. But at the moment, we should be pretty well covered by that anyway, with myself and Tim as also the very much a S&C minded folk strength coach as well. So Tim, do you want to give us a little bit of a intro of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Pleasure to be here, guys. My name is Tim, obviously, and I'm a physio and strength and conditioning coach from Sydney. So I did physio first and then a master's in high performance sport because I love S&C just as much as I love the physio stuff. And I guess that's what sort of led me down the ACL rehab path because, you know, being that double background in physio and S&C is perfect for ACL rehab. You can kind of take someone from A to Z with it all. So love that stuff. And I've worked out of a place called Athletes Authority, which I'm sure some people might have heard of. It's a really, really good high performance facility in Sydney that I've pretty much seen ACL clients exclusively for the last 3 years there. So I've really enjoyed it. Love, you know, the art and science of ACL rehab. Really enjoyable, and then had some interesting, you know, results with a few patients non-surgically as well. So yeah, that's sort of a bit of a background of me in a nutshell, and then my ACL experience.
Nice. So yeah, getting in, did you decide to go the S&C kind of path just so you could deal a bit, you felt like you'd be a little bit better kind of prepared with these higher level functioning kind of exercises or activities, like getting someone?
Yeah, it was a bit of a combo for me. Not only did I want to be better at the exercise rehab side of physio, I genuinely enjoy S&C as well. So I wanted to be, I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach too, and that's why, you know, I've done that alongside my ACL work. I was, you know, head of performance for a semi-professional rugby team here in Sydney too. But yeah, a big part of it was just being really good at that late stage rehab and return to play, and sort of niching myself into that sort of a practitioner that sort of specializes in that area. I feel like if you got the combo of the two, then you're quite good at that late stage and return to play, and then that can be a point of difference for you. Compared to other physios or other S&C. So you kind of, become a little bit unique in a way.
Nice. So you'll see someone through the whole process, basically?
Yep, that's it. I definitely enjoy the mid to late stage stuff the most. The early stage stuff doesn't interest me as much, but obviously I can handle someone from the very beginning if needed.
Yep, cool, nice. And if they have their own like club S&Cs or whatever, you're kind of just working in with them, or do you still try to take more of the initiative and the lead on it, or what?
Yeah, it really just depends on the setup of the person and where they're you know, playing at. Some clubs are really happy for you to sort of take the leads on the whole thing and what can't he do, and just you run the show. Other clubs are, you know, there's a little bit sometimes more politics involved, and they want to be running the show and you just sort of guiding and checking they're not doing anything silly. But so it really just depends on the person. It varies quite a lot, actually.
Cool. And also, don't forget to plug your other hustle, the PhysioNetwork, along here at some stage. So yeah, that's a great resource, and you get lots and lots of things about ACL and kind of sport-related exercise kind of resources, research reviews, that type of stuff on there. So remember to link people through to that.
I appreciate it.
So I wanted to use this as like a bit of almost like a ACL what do kind of session today. So because it's very likely to be watched by lots of students. So really just getting that idea kind of how we apply these principles in all the different phases of rehab, what we're kind of looking for barriers wise, and going through like that, what outcomes we're looking for, and then kind of what the research in general says around that. So if you want to kind of go through and maybe just a bit of an intro, you know, we've done our ACL and, you know, initially what's going to happen. So we've been out on the field, we've, you know, done a bad sidestep or something like that, a non-contact ACL. Right from the word go, what's kind of going on there, and what are you looking for programming and barriers wise in that first real acute initial phase?
Yeah, I guess one of the most important things, you know, in my time as a physio that I've learned with perhaps the diagnosis of the injury side of things, which is quite an important step, obviously, is, you know, I remember, you know, you learn all the tests in the world at uni and how to do them and that. And it's funny, like with an ACL injury, they often aren't great in those first day or two post-injury at actually telling you, you know, that the hamstrings often spasm right up and protect the knee, and you try to do your Lockmans and you're like, oh no, it doesn't feel too bad, and you know, everything feels okay. And that's happened, you know, a couple of times in the earlier stage of my career where I've felt like the ACL hasn't been ruptured, and gone on, they've got an MRI, and sure enough it has. So I guess like one clinical pearl I've sort of learned is, if the person tells you that, you know, they felt their knee buckle and give way, and their knee then, you know, started swelling up afterwards, and they had a moment of instability, I would almost always assume that there is an ACL and refer them on to get an MRI. So rather than relying just purely on your hands-on tests, I really would listen to the patient's subjective story of how the injury happened, what they felt, and whether their knee started blowing up since, and then, you know, refer on for an MRI if they tick those boxes, and just to rule it out, because quite often you can miss the boat there. So that's sort of that's from the diagnosis side of things. In terms of if we know there is an ACL injury and what to do there, well, for me, like obviously it's quite interesting how people's perspectives have changed about this. And the default response, you know, 5-10 years ago is like, okay, yeah, so when are you going to get your surgery done? But you know, so we're sort of learning more now that you know, there is a potential path for non-surgical management of ACL injuries too, and it doesn't work out for everyone. It's not a black or white topic. It's very, very interesting, a lot of shades of grey. But my approach is to work through a period of, you know, 3, 4, 5 months of structured exercise rehab, and see how the person copes, and, you know, try to gradually progress them back towards what they want to do, and see if you can get them back non-surgically first. And that obviously does depend on if there is other concomitant injuries to the knee too. Like if someone's got a bad meniscal tear, a full MCL and ACL, they're less likely to fit that mold and be able to get away without surgery. But if someone's got a clean ACL rupture and they're functioning quite well in the immediate sort of period post the injury, and, you know, they don't have any really strict timelines or rush or anything to get back on 9 months, no matter what, you know, if they're like a professional athlete and the next season starts at 9 months, there might be more of a case for that person. So, okay, let's go the more tried and trodden path and just make sure I'm back in time 100%. But yeah, so like I like to just work through progressive exercise rehab. Sometimes consult with a surgeon if there is other concomitant injuries to the knee, just to get their take too on whether they think surgery would be definitely needed. And then go from there. So I guess that's a bit more around the decision making on surgical versus non-surgical is an interesting one.
I think I can't remember the paper that I read, but recent enough. It's one of those really big studies from from around like Norway or Denmark or something, where it was talking about that, like the biggest predictive factors of like whether or not, because it was going down that copers and non-copers kind of pathway, and then the biggest predictive factors of whether or not those who were copers would stay or not were like, quadriceps strength and concurrent MCL or meniscal injury. So those are definitely things that we need to kind of, I guess, put into that decision making of how's this person going to go. Not that you can't get away with having both a meniscus injury and an ACL and kind of not being a coper, because we've probably all had those patients that have, for whatever reason, had to put off their surgery and they've rehabbed up pretty fine. But I mean, I think it was about a 50% predictive kind of value if they had both an ACL and a meniscal tear, that they would later on go down the surgical pathway. So it was an interesting read.
Yeah, there's a few factors. Some of the key ones, as I mentioned, are if there is a concomitant injury to the knee. What the research also shows is that people who are older and also females were more likely to be copers than younger males too, which is interesting. Another thing that sort of I found clinically is if someone has had like a really high level of neuromuscular function before the injury, they're more likely, in my experience, to go well than someone who, let's say, has done zero strength training before and generally doesn't have great neuromuscular, strength and control in that, and then you've taken away a passive stabilizer in the ACL. They don't even have great active stability, and those people are generally more likely to not go as well either. And then the final one would be more of the psychosocial side of things. If someone's like super worried about their knee, doesn't trust it, has read all this stuff about how without an ACL, you're going to get osteoarthritis and all this stuff that isn't necessarily true. Those people too, that's definitely another underrated factor in terms of how well someone will go as a coper or non-coper. So there's some of the things I look at.
Cool. Anything there, Connor, to add before I kind of go on to next question?
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well.
Cool. I was going to kind of go now. So, even if we are deciding kind of surgery, the gold standard now is that, we're having to wait to that quiet knee. So wait until, your swelling's down, you're getting most of your range back, because surgeons really don't want kind of bad outcomes for operating on a knee that's kind of cranky anyway. So it gives us a good chance to possibly even turn someone or give someone a chance who is not going to be a coper possibly into a coper kind of area anyway, or if not, at least give them the best preoperative rehab. So what's your kind of go-to there? My understanding is that, quadriceps strength is a big predictive value of A, whether someone's going to be coper or not, but then B, also the post-surgical kind of outcomes, even long-term down the track. I think one of the papers that we all read before this was really interesting, that that was like a predictive value there of how someone was going to go even 2 years after surgery. So what are your kind of thoughts on that initial rehab phase there, and what we really need to be doing in that first, say, hopefully at least 6 weeks before someone gets surgery? I know, NRL a lot of times it's like, 48 hours, 1 week, but, hopefully we get
couple of hours.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. On the field, on the sideline.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I like to keep it pretty simple. The three main goals I have leading up to surgery are to reduce the swelling in the knee, improve the range of movement, and then, as you said, work on that quadriceps and hamstring strength. I like to focus on those three things really. And as you said, it's interesting. There's a paper, I think it's by Failer et al. 2016 that shows that even up to 2 years post surgery, if you come in and you've ticked off those boxes, you have better outcomes, which is pretty cool to see. So we as physios can make quite a big impact even before the surgery has happened, which is, a lot of physios think, okay, it's always post surgical that is the focus, but pre-op, some really important things you can be doing. And look, in terms of programming, it just depends on a few factors. So it depends on if they do have a concomitant injury to the knee. So if they have a bad meniscal tear, you might not be able to do the same sort of things as if they didn't. Same with like an MCL too. So let's say, for example, they do have a bit of a nasty meniscal tear as well. They might not like doing too much deep loaded knee flexion. You might have to work in more of a reduced range of movement with them. or maybe do a bit more open chain focus than closed chain, and get a little bit less compressive load through the tibiofemoral joint. It also depends obviously on their training history before the injury. Like if they've never done any S&C before, then you're going to be doing different exercises with someone who has done a lot of S&C before. But really, like there's not necessarily any right or wrong, mustn't do or must do exercises here. It's just picking exercises that the person can tolerate that achieve those goals that we said. So for me, honestly, it looks like quite normal training for me. If someone doesn't have any other serious concomitant injury, I'm going to try to get them squatting, RDLs, like split squatting, just like what looks like a pretty normal, like GPP, general physical prep type program, and get them as strong as I possibly can before the surgery, because we know obviously post-surgery there's going to be a drop in function. So if we can lift that ceiling a little bit so the drop isn't as bad, that's sort of the goal. Yeah.
That's kind of the way we've been discussing and thinking of things. Hey, Connor, there's a lot of time being that envelope of function. And it's basically, I guess, there's been an acute injury, intra-articular, it's not going to have a massive, I guess, envelope of function that it's going to be able to deal with. So it's finding, I guess, what are you using? Frequency, a little bit more frequency, a little bit lower intensity, kind of workouts going along there. So kind of getting a little bit more stimulation, maybe tempo kind of to constrain the external load or something that you're placing on it, or kind of it's very individualized, or do you have like a kind of a set starting point that you usually go?
Yeah, I think what you said's great there. You can manipulate many different rehab variables to suit whatever the patient can tolerate. And I think tempo is a great example. Range of movement's a great example. Whether the type of exercise, like open chain versus closed chain, is a good example. Load, frequency, all these things can be manipulated just to make it as sort of comfy for the person as possible. So that's what rehab's all about. It's all about picking what exercises can the person tolerate the best, that's also going to tick off the goals we have. And if you can do that as a physio, you can pick good exercises that suit your goals that the patient can tolerate and enjoys, then you're killing it as a physio. And that's what it's all about.
Yep. So just with your goals, obviously you've got range of motion as a key goal. You've got reduced swelling and get the knee happy. The other one was the quadriceps strength. Are you strictly measuring strength, like with a dynamometer or force plates or things like that? Or are you just seeing how they move essentially?
Yeah, good question. I definitely like to try and measure strength, but how we do that will vary depending on what you have available, obviously, in your clinic. And after an ACL injury, sometimes people might not like doing, leg extensions too much if there is a bit of laxity happening in the knee and then it feels a bit funny on them. So that might be one that some people have used in the past, is leg extension strength and comparing it between sides, but they might not like that. So one that I have found that people do generally tolerate really well, that literally anyone can do in any clinic, is a single leg squat, max reps, or weighted single leg squats. Because I don't really generally like doing just body weight single leg squat max reps, because if the person's relatively strong, they'll be able to bang out 30 or so, and you're not really testing strength there at all. So most clinics, they will have like a kettlebell or a dumbbell up to 10, 12, 14 kilos. So you can add that, get them to hold it and do single leg squats to a box at 90 degrees and max reps, and literally anyone can do that. You don't need any fancy equipment or anything like that. So that's great. If you do have a handheld dyno, you can do a quad strength isometric at 90 degrees, which generally the patient will tolerate pretty well too. So yeah, sure.
And so that 90 degrees as well. So you're looking at those, that kind of range. Any particular reason there?
That's what a lot of the research is done for testing. And so you can get normative values that way. And also generally at that position, the ACL would be under less stress if it was there. So it's less likely to annoy the knee in that position too.
Cool. All right. We've had Kurt's joined us now. So it's
there he is.
Let him in. So the big man, he was wanting, absolutely begging me to come on to this podcast. So he said that he'd fail me on my mentorship if he didn't. So I better let him in. So Kurt, you want to just quickly say hi, mate? And you just got to unmute your mic there and turn your video on.
I'm actually driving at the moment.
Oh, that's right. Well, we'll just let you listen, mate. That sounds good, and just pipe in if you have any questions, hey? Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
I can definitely talk. I've just got to be at a cultural day for a soccer team I'm working with.
Nice. That's all right, mate. So we're just covering that early stage pre-op stuff. Yeah, it's been really good. Tim said that basically we're going to be like looking at our main goals of kind of getting that swelling down, getting that range of motion back, and getting as much kind of strength and using like a leg symmetry index, Tim. So, you know, versus because at that early stage, the unaffected leg shouldn't have detrained or anything. So it can be a good thing that we're kind of going towards.
That's a great point too, mate. That's something I should add. I'd like to take my unaffected side measurements as early as possible for our return to play goals. You know, so as we know, like over the course of an ACL rehab, just because you can't train as normally, it's very likely that even your good side goes downhill a little bit. So if we can take those measurements of your quad and hammy strength literally as soon as possible after the injury, then that makes it more reliable to use as a return to play marker for the affected side later. So that's a good point to add.
Cool. Awesome. Anything to add there, Connor, question-wise or anything before we kind of go on to?
No, not really question-wise. I was just going to mention, the unaffected leg's pretty important because if that detrains and you're comparing what you've done in rehab to something that's detrained, then potentially you're not getting them back to where they need to be. So it's important to check the other leg.
100%.
And this would probably be the biggest one for that Kurt would see actually. And then as a S&C coach, your role at this stage is really going, what can I do if your physio isn't looking after this, or if like you guys are working together, it's like, what can we do to maintain or even improve the other leg strength? So that way we've got something that we're looking towards like later on down the track that we're comparing to a standard which all the other players are actually at. So that way the person's not going through this, 9 month even, or hopefully less than that, detraining of both limbs basically. So anything in particular, any pearls that you got kind of, Kurt, that you do when you're seeing one of these people to make sure you're keeping that other leg kind of up and really going to what you want as a good reference?
Not necessarily say a reference for the other leg, but make sure you're still actually doing single leg strength work on it, because you will get a crossover of strength regardless. It's just making sure that you're still trying to maintain, obviously, or build that affected leg to then catch up per se. So I don't necessarily use references on the unaffected limb because I still make sure they're training on it.
Yeah.
So that's probably my biggest point I take away. I guess give here is not to let it detrain. You're obviously going to get some level of detraining, but you can still go to the gym. You can still do a lot of single leg work without having the other leg involved.
Yep, 100%.
And I'd kind of even say here, what I like to look at trying to do is go, I say like, someone's been able to handle a total volume of stress over their training history originally, whatever their kind of, volume load that they would deal with in a certain session is. Now you've kind of cut out what part of what their volume load they'd be able to deal with. So that system is still able to deal with a decent amount. You just have to find a way to be able to kind of slowly edge some of that extra training volume over onto that other leg, so that whole system's kind of total workload isn't dropping down, and same as kind of increasing a little bit of upper. So it's a really good time to work on some upper body goals, that type of stuff, just so you're making sure that the whole system itself and all the energy systems aren't detraining as well. So I think this is this pre-op and then just straight post-op time is a good one to kind of, everything else gets a little bit more training because that side there can't be contributing as much to the total stressor that the system is having to deal with. That's the way I think of it anyway.
Yeah, nice.
Cool.
And just to add to that as well, it's not just strength stuff that can be added. You can still do cardio work on a single leg. Like You've got different variations where you've got a rowing machine where you've got the affected limb stationary on a skateboard, a dolly, whatever you want to use, slide board and stuff, or you can actually undo one of the cranks on a bike and still cycle on the left leg only. Like, it does, you just don't want to do it too often. Just enough that you're still getting some sort of workload, but not creating such a huge imbalance again.
Yep. Nice. Anything else to add, anyone?
No, that's great.
Cool. So we've unfortunately that we haven't been able to, you know, get them to persuade or dissuade from surgery, or they just needed surgery. We've done a really good rehab bout at them. So they've gone, they've had their surgery. Is there anything different that kind of very initial post-op surgical phase looks like, Tim, compared to that kind of pre-op, I've just done my ACL?
It's honestly quite similar in terms of the goals of reducing swelling, improving range, and working on quad strength. But obviously the biggest factor here is going to be, you know, the exercise prescription and selection for your quad exercises. You can't just be jumping back into the sort of things you were doing before surgery, because, you know, you've obviously had another traumatic event to the knee, which is surgery itself. People always forget that surgery is trauma to the knee, especially when you look at an ACL surgery. I don't know if you guys have ever watched one. It's pretty interesting what they do. I'd definitely recommend any students listening to you know, watch on YouTube some ACL videos from inside the knee, and how they you know drive up through the tunnel and create tunnels to slide the new ACL through, and, you know, go through bone, and it's quite interesting to watch. So yeah, look, the same goal. So reduce swelling, improve range, and then start getting the quads fire. You know, start getting those quads firing as soon as possible. And you know, for me, in terms of what I like to do for that, I find that people sort of go to these, you know, little like inner range knee exercises straight away. But I quite like also using, you know, isometric exercises, as in like wall sits, double and single leg. I find that you don't need to just do your little only do your inner range quad and straight leg raise type work. You can, I found that, yeah, wall sits, double leg, and progressing to single leg wall sits are a really good one that people can tolerate quite well, quite early, because it's isometric. It's in a good position for the knee in terms of sort of range you can get into, anywhere from sort of 90 if you're killing it, through to, you know, 145 degrees of that knee flexion. And yeah, like I like to use those exercises. And then another huge one for me is doing hamstring strengthening early. In Australia, we tend to use hamstring grafts for our surgeries more often than not. And I find that people just always focusing so much on the quads in the first couple of months post-surgery, but the hamstrings are often the one that take the longest to come back in the end. So getting into hamstring stuff safely and early is very important. And I would start that off by simply just doing like a prone knee bend. And you can even lift it up with using your other leg to assist it up, and then lower just with the injured side if you don't have the strength to lift it up from, you know, concentrically. But yeah, getting into some hammy stuff early, and then also you can still be hammering your glutes and hammering your calves and everything around it. It's just the muscles that'll be the most compromised are going to be quads and hammies, but you should be going ham on your glute work and your calf work and your other leg, and then your upper body, as we mentioned earlier. So yeah, that's some initial thoughts around that sort of first 6 weeks post-surgery.
So, because we're thinking, I guess, the main things that are decreasing that envelope of function, or decreasing what your recoverable volume load are, I guess you got like the swelling and all of the substrates that go along with that there, which are kind of all catabolic stimuli. So they're all kind of making it hard for the knee to actually kind of adapt to stuff there. So, and then you also have, I guess, yeah, the fact that there's been an acute injury. So you got like pain inhibition and that type of stuff happening there. So you're kind of saying, basically, if we can just find exercises that aren't like what's your idea pain wise there, like what are you kind of allowing to make sure that you're not getting that kind of person fearful or pain inhibition too much happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's super important to convey to the patient early a couple of things. That one that pain is normal after a surgery. even just trying to hobble around, you're going to be in pain. So just making sure they understand that it's normal. And then the second thing, that pain doesn't mean that something's being damaged in the knee. And that's a super important message to convey. I think 99% of the general public assume that pain means there's some damage occurring. And if you can just explain to them that the knee is very sensitive, and because it's just had surgery on it, like things are, sort of hypersensitive in the knee, it's going to feel pain when there might not necessarily be anything going wrong, and sort of get them on board with that message, then that's really important part of buy-in in early stage rehab. Because look, I'm not telling you want to get the patient pushing through 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 level of pain, but just I'm always happy to work up to sort of a 3 or 4 out of 10. I think there's no worries there. But having said that, if you're not seeing the patient every day and working with them on their exercises, you don't want to send them away with stuff that's just always causing them discomfort every single exercise you give them, because then they're less likely to actually do it. So you try to find a few exercises. One of them might be just a work up to a 2 or 3 out of 10, and then the others they can do without much issues at all. And that's probably a good balance of pushing into a bit, but not annoying them too much, and making them be less adherent with the exercises you give them.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we know like an adaptive response is going to be increase in muscle mass, hopefully increase in range of motion, all that type of stuff. What's a maladaptive response for us to kind of look out for, to go, hey, I need to change my exercise prescription parameters?
Let's say it's on the topic of pain and swelling. So I'm okay with up to a 3 or 4 out of 10 pain at the time. But let's say they do that exercise, and then for the next 3 days, their pain has been lifted a fair bit. That's a sign. That's a maladaptive response. I would want pain to always settle back to baseline within 24 hours. If it goes beyond that, then you may be just done a little bit too much. And then same with the swelling response. Let's say they have quite a bad swelling response, and things get a little bit puffier and more annoyed, and that holds again for longer than 24 hours, then that's probably another sign that you've done something a little bit maladaptive, and then the knee hasn't quite been up to it yet. So I'd look for those two things and the persistence of those two things.
Something that I've heard before in terms of getting range of motion back is that terminal knee extension sometimes can be blocked by something called a Cyclops lesion. Have you ever experienced those, or are they something that you look out for? And how long do you give someone to achieve full knee extension before you start to worry about that kind of thing?
Yeah, great question. They're not too uncommon, unfortunately. For me, what I normally do is, if I'm hammering knee extension and really working on it, and it's just not budging over a period of several weeks. So let's say nothing's really changed in 3 or 4 weeks, even though we've been working at it, it's still not that close to full range. Then that's when I start scratching my head. So if you're doing the right things, you're working on it consistently, the patient's adhering to the exercises, and it's really not changing at all over a period of weeks, that's the red flag for me to go, okay, we're doing our part here, we're doing everything we can, what's going on in the knee? And then that's when we can go for a referral to get some imaging, or to even see the surgeon again. I might try to get them back in for their post-surgical appointment a little bit earlier if I'm worried about them. They might have one upcoming in a couple of months, but if the knee hasn't budged in terms of range in 3 or 4 weeks, even though you've been working hard at it, then I might try to get them to see the surgeon a little bit earlier. So that's the sort of red flag that I look out for there. Yeah.
Cool.
What I'd like to maybe spend this last 5 minutes covering, just to round off this early phase stuff before we get into the more fun stuff, would maybe be the possible kind of use of, well, we're knowing, say, to get a muscle to adapt. So, we know our goals, again, swelling management, pain management, increase quadriceps and hamstring strength. We know to make muscles grow and get stronger, they have to apply some mechanical tension onto it. We need to, we have different ways, applying mechanical tension, getting it to get enough work in that you get some muscle kind of damage happening, or you get that metabolic stress type of thing. So because quite often you've had an injury, you can't handle lots of volume, you can't handle, lots of mechanical tension on it. Do you ever use anything like blood flow restriction training? And then the next part I'd like to also go in would be, getting Kurt to kind of go in and say how we get these people in this time to make sure they're still feeling part of the team or the culture to keep them actually engaged in the rehab process. So if we can kind of chat that in the last little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think blood flow restriction is a very useful tool post ACL. Main reason being, as you said, if we're trying to go for the goal of improving strength and improving hypertrophy of a muscle, but we can't use very heavy loads, then we need to work out, okay, how else can I stimulate that sort of muscle hypertrophy without the load being there as much? And that's where we go for, okay, let's hammer the metabolic stress side of things, and blood flow restriction is perfect for that. So obviously, if you haven't heard of it before, it sort of includes a lot of the return of the blood flow away from the muscle, so you get a buildup of metabolites in the muscle, which is a trigger for some anabolic pathways. So it's super useful to use. I've seen it used many times as well. When I interned at the Sevens, there was a protocol that they used which I really liked. It was it was essentially 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off of a weighted goblet squat. Might only be 8 to 10 kilos they're holding, but they're just doing constant tension squats. So they're never locking out at the top, and they're going for 30 seconds and then 30 seconds off, and they would do that 5 times back to back, and then take off the cuffs, let the knee, the quads blow up a little bit less, and then have a rest for 2 or 3 minutes, and they would do that again 2 or 3 times. So it's like 3 sets of 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, constant tension squats, and that was really effective, and you could just see that metabolic stress and then the muscle just blowing up immediately from that, which was really cool to watch. So yeah, if you have it, I'd certainly recommend using it. And if you don't have cuffs, look into getting them, because they can be very useful for more than just ACLs too. It's essentially any time where you just can't use high load and you still want to be aiming for strength and hypertrophy, they're useful for you. So for sure.
Nice. And it's like real low loads, like 20%, 1 RM.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
Yep, even less. Like, as I said, at the Sevens, we had these guys who could squat 180 kilos and, they're holding 10 kilo kettlebell and just doing constant tension squats for 30 seconds and then just going 30 on, 30 off. So you're manipulating the work to rest interval to achieve what you want to get from that metabolic stress sort of pathway as well, which is cool.
Nice. Kurt, do you want to have a little chat on anything blood flow restriction that you've used? And then what I'll do is I'll open up another chat and we can just continue on if everyone's okay for another about 20 minutes maybe.
I don't really have too much more to say with blood flow restriction. The stuff I've done is pretty similar to protocols around, where you change between your reps, like between 30 reps the first set and then short break, 15 reps, and essentially 3 sets type of stuff. So I haven't steered too far away from the kind of recommendations around reps with blood flow restriction. So no, I don't have too much to say on top of that.
Yeah, I've used basically the 30, 15, 15, 15 protocol, or just basically, I think the general premise, the general idea is just getting it basically proximity to failure, getting it close to failure and making sure the muscles burn, and then making sure that you stay within all those parameters that Tim was talking about with irritability later on. So, alrighty, cool. So, yeah, we were just at that talking about the blood flow restriction, how to kind of use that in there. And then I find that is a good way to talk about how to integrate them back into, I guess, training and feeling part of a team, keeping them engaged in the rehab process, because it's pretty bloody hard. If anyone has done it before, it's really hard. So for a lot of athletes, this early phase ACL rehab can feel like they're kind of fluffing around, not really working really hard. So I really like the idea of this, using something like blood flow restriction, or restricting, like increasing your tempos like crazy. So that way you're building up that metabolic stress to make these competitive people, because quite often it'll be an athlete who's done an ACL, make them actually feel like they're training. So anyone have any kind of big tips on, making the person engage with this process at this stage, dealing with that kind of psychosocial side, keeping them part of the team, any of that type of stuff? We'll start.
Yeah, for me, I think a great way you can do it is is to get them in the gym doing their rehab at the same time that the rest of the squad's also in the gym training. And then they're sort of like in that same environment, you know, the healthy squad are getting around the guy working and like giving him support. And, you know, like I think that's a great way to make them feel like they're working at the same time as the team. And then in terms of up on field, like often I find the head coach tells the athletes that, you know, to sort of stay away a little bit from the field for a while, just mentally refresh. Don't worry about being up there. And then, you know, with it might be the rugby ball, the soccer ball, whatever athlete they are, but like just when that's so far away, actually being there and being able to do those things again, it's often better to just have a little bit of time away originally. But I think getting in the gym with the people at the same time the rest of the squad's training and everyone's training together, I think that's a good way to go about it, I've found.
Cool. And then like having them aim for another big goal, like an upper goal or something like that they can actually be integrated in with the team with some normal training and then some kind of rehab stuff.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
No. Cool. And Kurt just apologized. He had to, the soccer's culture day actually got brought forward to 9:30. So he was going to be give us some golden tips on this, but we'll hopefully we should cover as much as we can anyway from that. So I reckon that early stage is pretty good. The next big thing, unless you have anything else to cover, the next big thing is kind of getting someone back to that kind of return to run, return to kind of train phase, actually starting to integrate them into the team. So that, yeah, return to run. What are kind of your variables there? How are we getting back gait and kind of progressing it towards sprinting?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and I find it's one that physios generally aren't as skilled in as that, you know, that earlier stage rehab. They kind of just think about, you know, the typical physio response I've seen is they go, okay, we've done a bit of quad strengthening, done a bit of hamstring strengthening, you know, the knees got better range and not much swelling. Let's just go back to running now. But it's really important to do these exercises that help bridge the gap between your traditional gym exercises where you're just working on quad and hammy strength and actually running. There's some great things you can do in terms of, you know, plyometric prep and even running drills. If you work on those two things for a period of, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks before you start running, I think it goes a really long way. So in terms of plyometric stuff, you know, you might have heard of the plyometric continuum before, but doing like a little bit of force absorption work where you might even just start with like a tall to short, where you're up on your toes, coming down and then landing, just like getting a little bit of like impact loading through the knee is really, really important to see how it responds, because that type of loading, that impact loading, is completely different to any other loading that you do in your more traditional gym-based exercises. And it doesn't prepare you to run as well as giving the knee these little impacts to get used to before they start running. So I think the, you know, plyometric continuum, working on those early stages of tall to shorts and a bit of force absorption work is fantastic for this. And then, as I said, actually doing some more progressive, like a bit further along the plyometric continuum, but still early days, doing some pogos, like double leg and single leg pogos, where you are working on the stretch shortening cycle and getting that repeated impacts, just like the same sort of load it's going to get when you're running, those impacts through the knee and repeated impacts, and just getting that stretch shortening going. And I think that's really, really useful. If you can do some double leg pogos and single leg pogos and the knee handles it well without any swelling or anything like that, it's a very good sign that when they return back to running, they're not going to have any problems too. So I think I almost use it as a litmus test. If someone can do single leg pogos for, 30 seconds and do a few sets of that and pull up really well and go fine, that person's going to be in a pretty good position to return back to running. So that's more the plyometric side of things. And then, as I said, also using running drills to prepare someone to run is it's common sense for some, but not for others. Like if you want to get someone back to running, why not break down the task and build it up slowly? Like, so you can start with like a wall drill where you're leaning against the wall and just practicing that sort of running position, and then working into an A walk. So you're doing those positions walking, and then you're doing it marching, and then you're doing it like as a proper A skip, and it just builds up the impact load, gets the person used to some of the joint angles they have when they're running. And look, if you can do those two things, like work on some plyos and work on some running drills, and do that for 3 or 4 weeks before they run, you're killing it. You're in the top 5% of physios preparing people for running, returning to running. So that'd be my hot tips there.
Cool. I might plug myself here and say that hopefully I'll get that blog up soon for you on this exact thing, on that rehab kind of plyometrics continuum, and I'll have some videos I can share for that. So that'll be good.
Looking forward to it.
Very much so. That's yeah, I 100% agree. All that stuff, super important. And it shows your confidence. Like, it's nothing worse than sending someone out to run and then they start to get this massive kind of wobble because they're just not confident on throwing it on that leg, and then you've mentally set them back a long way. So if you can show them, you know, through plyometrics, through some return to running, they should almost know that they're going to be able to run before they do.
That's exactly right. It shouldn't be this big mental jump in their head. Like, if they've built up to it, doing like A skips and little, like, even high knees on the spot gently and things like that, like, you're telling them that you pretty much are running. Like, you're already doing it. You help give them some confidence there, and then they just start moving, start making it move, and it's normally goes really well doing that.
And thoughts on, I'm pretty sure the Randall Cooper, the Melbourne ACL protocol, it's about 70% kind of leg symmetry indexes and like 70% max strength.
Yeah.
Kind of the aim in a lot of these, both compound and isolated movements, is the aim for that return to run area. Yeah,
there was a review on this Ramboard 2018 where they looked at criteria for return to run, and the funny thing is they found in the review that most papers did not use any like objective criteria. They just said, all right, 3 months, we're good to go. That's a huge takeaway. Like, things should not only be time based. And I'm not saying to not use time. Like, you know, I'm not going to return someone back to, you know, to sport at 6 months post-op if they're killing all their objective markers. Time is still important, but the most important thing to know is it's not the only thing you use. You need to use it alongside objective criteria. So, look, like you said, 70% quad and hamstring strength on your limb symmetry index is what that review found. But I mean, me personally, if someone can do those plyos and those running drills, even if they're at like 60, 65, I'm not going to stop them, because I find that they don't have as big a correlation between how well someone returns to run as their ability on those plyometrics and their running drills are. Personally, that's sort of what I've found.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I get, and you're going to talk that, I guess, that dynamic systems theory, this probably gets important further down the track, where you really do want those numbers like to be like later on down the track, where it's going to be like 90-odd%, you know, close to 100%. That's where you really do want those numbers there, because compensations later on, the body will just find a way to do it. And as long as it looks nice and everything, I'm happy with that. But we have to also, as physios, know that, okay, if they're not getting it out of their quads, or they're getting it from their calf complex or their glutes, something like that is kind of taking up a bit more of the slack there. The body's awesome. It'll organize itself to complete the task, and as long as it looks nice, I'm happy with it, until right down the end is where I get a bit more pedantic. Making sure that, you know,
I agree,
via that dynamic systems theory, that it's kind of everything is able to tolerate whatever we're going to put it through. But when it's low chaos, it's low risk as well, I think.
That's exactly right, mate. And I was just going to say that it's also preparing the tissues for higher speed running is more important. Like, if you're trying to get someone to run at a high speed and their hamstrings are still at 60, 70%, that's when you're going to run into problems. So for really low speed first return to run, strength isn't as important, but you want the tissues to be strong enough to handle the higher speed running stuff. And that's where the percentages factor in more and more.
Cool. Anything there, Connor?
No, the only question I would have would be, how soon can you start your pogos and things like that? Is it and your taller shorts and things like that? Is it just as soon as the knee's quiet? Are there any other criteria that you're looking for before you can start those things?
Yeah, good question. My goal is to try start it for 3 or 4 weeks before I'm trying to get them back to returning to running. So I think as soon as the knee's pretty quiet and you've obviously got a little base level of strength going, I like to just do these things like these tall to shorts and these little run drills as a test, see how they pull up. And if they pull up really well and they go good, that's sort of the green light
Progress
to
it.
continue. So whenever you first try something, you might not know the perfect time to start it, but you do a small dose of it, you do it as a test, and if they pull up sweet, then that's a good sign that you can progress these things. So it's almost that this is where the art comes into it a little bit more. It's not always like, okay, at 2 months I can do this. You've got to try things sometimes. Just be smart about it. Don't do anything stupid the first time. Do it at a low dose, low volume, and then see how they pull up, and then you can progress from there. So that's my general approach with things.
Great. Cool.
That suits really what we've talked about in every other kind of lead up podcast. This all of the initial ones is like, some people really like to think that they can predict these things and predict, but realistically, we're just going to adapt to whatever, and you just have to be able to really good at assessing and going, is this a positive adaptation and we're good to go, or did they adapt negatively, and then I got to play with other training variables again to find their starting point, to find their entry point that they do finally adapt to, and then we can build from there. So I think that's it shows that constant communication and assessment of whatever your outcome, whether it's a quiet knee or whatever it is at that stage, or the person's confidence with the task that you were getting them to do. And you just got to assess that and go. So how about going in towards, those higher level, returning to, say, sprinting, returning to changing direction, maybe some like integrating back into training. What's your go-to with programming around that?
That's a massive question.
Sorry.
just putting it out there. Just mid and late stage all in one. Good luck. I can give you a good foundation of what I like to do from mid to late stage. So just like anything, I think if you know good regressions and progressions for whatever movement skill you're working on, then you're really set as a physio. So to talk about change of direction and agility, I even like to start lateral movement progressions. It's like super early during the rehab process. You don't need to wait until someone has run and run up to 80% or so in a straight line before you start any lateral movement at all. Like, I think that's a bit of a myth that sometimes people, they go, okay, now you've got to nail straight line before you do any change of direction. But I find that you can just really regress back the change of direction movements and literally start someone on something like a static lateral lunge at the 2 to 3 month mark post surgery, and you're just starting to get reps in and a lateral movement and pushing back, exactly the type of thing they're going to have to do when they do a sidestep or when they do a lateral shuffle on field. And you can start that stuff super early. You might start with a static lateral lunge, then move into a dynamic one where you actually step into it and push back. And then that might turn into like a leap and land laterally, and then like a lateral rebound where you leap to the side and rebound back. And doing that and progressing that over a couple of months, you're pretty much preparing someone for that change of direction type movement. And so I think it's just super important to understand that the more reps you can get in early in a safe, controlled way, and as we spoke about earlier, control the tempo, control the range to make it favorable for the person at the time, but get reps in, build confidence in those movement patterns, and then build it up and up. And then when they return back to on field doing this stuff at higher speeds, they've already gotten in hundreds of reps of this type of thing, and they're just much more proficient at it and much more confident at it too. So that's how I like to think about change of direction. And then once you get on, no, you go, mate. It's all good.
I was going to say, I reckon with change of direction as well, a big thing I see people mistake is gait is also a continuum, the whole way from walking up to sprinting. You know what I mean? So you're just finding like where they're at with your testing that you've done, that like dynamical systems. You go, okay, their quads, whatever, 80%, they could handle X speed. So, maybe at even 50, 60%, might have just doing some walking back forward, like, we're walking, they're mirroring someone walk back forward, walking laterally. They might be doing some games where they're playing with the ball and not thinking about their knee, but doing some walking change of direction. And it's just building up your volume, your intensity, your frequency that matches whatever your assessment has kind of shown that they're up to, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. So like once you're sort of happy that they can perform that movement well, then it's just a matter of progressing the speed that they do it at and the complexity and whether it's a chaotic or a controlled environment. So to take like a sidestep, for example, just like you said, you can get someone to do like a walking wide drill you can literally get them to do that at like 3 months post-op. They can walk in and then pretend to do a little sidestep at slow speeds. And then the goal for you is to gradually build up the speed they do that up, and then build up the chaotic nature of the environment. So you might make it more reactive, where they just react to you pointing one way, and then you might progress it to you actually run forward to meet them, and then you move one way. So they're reacting to a moving target rather than just pointing one direction. Then it might be doing a series of them. So you might set up, series of cones, whereas like blue or red is an option, and they've got to do like 3 side steps in a row. So it's just adding complexity, adding speed, adding more reactive elements to it, and doing that, over a period of several months to try and have them meet their goal of whenever they're trying to get back to return to play. But yeah, like it's all just common sense progressions and regressions. And I think that's a huge takeaway for this with ACL rehab. If you can work from the end in mind and know what the person needs to get back to being able to do, and then have regressions along the whole continuum, then you just gradually work them along that and get them more confident in each step of all these different movements you want them to be able to do. And then that's in essence how to summarize my answer to your question. Like mid to late stage rehab is work with the end goal in mind, and how do you regress them back and work them through a series of steps to tick off that movement competency in the environment they're going to need to do in sport. That's what it's all about.
The thing that I was thinking right then is the thing that I want to make sure that people don't get wrong from that answer. What I was saying as well would be basically that, to me anyway, and correct me if you think differently, but I think the only way you could really get that wrong is if you put someone in a task that was like too advanced for them, but kind of kept plugging away at it until they did it, because they might eventually be able to get that task and not, nothing bad really happens, but then they've done it in a way their body wasn't kind of, all their system isn't ready for. They're going to organize all these compensations that then you're going to, so you don't want to bring them into that high intensity chaos too early. They might get through it, they might not. If they do get through it, well, then they're going to have got through it using different strategies to what you're actually trying to train and adapt. And then you got this bit of a shitstorm later that you actually have to untrain. Yeah, bad habits that you have to untrain.
Yep. Completely agree, mate. 100%.
Cool. Any particular like testing in that kind of mid to late stage that you really kind of hang your hat on?
Yeah, well, for me, like the biggest goal of that mid to late stage area is just building strength and power. Like that's what it's all about. And then obviously your return to run and return to change of direction progressions are happening too. So like they're the big things I look at. So in terms of strength testing, this is where you can start to do stuff that, the knee might not have liked to do earlier on. So in terms of hamstrings, if you have a Nord board, that's fantastic. I found it super useful to really show up differences between sides. You might try like single leg hamstring bridges and things like that, but the body, as you mentioned before, is brilliant at compensating, and you might just use the glutes might just help out a little bit more to get your reps out on that. And it's just not the same. Unfortunately, I've found there's really not much of a substitute for a direct hamstring strength test like a Nordic on a Nord board, or if you have a leg curl, even a leg curl I found is super useful to test the hamstrings a lot more so than like a hamstring bridge, where it really is a bit more of a compound type lift. So that's what I go to for hammies. So yeah, I go, if you have a Nord board, great. Most people don't. If you have a leg curl, great. Still some people might not. If you don't have either of those, then you're going to have to probably revert back to more of a hamstring bridge type movement to get a goal, or a handheld dyno if you have that too. So it just really depends what you have available. Then the same sort of principle for quads. Like I've found it's really interesting. A lot of people like to use leg press, but again, in my experience, I've found people compensate on it. They use adductor more, they use glute more, and you get them doing that. Oh, yeah, feels dead even. Then you get them on like a single leg extension, and there's like a 20% difference between sides. And you're like, okay, we know that a leg extension is only quad. We know that a leg press can be quad, adductor, glute. And so you know that something's compensating there. So I really like a single leg extension, for reps. And it's not the type of thing I do a 1RM of. It's not the type of exercise you would do a 1RM with, but I tend to try to find a weight that someone can bang out between sort of 4 to 8 reps so that it's still in that sort of strength zone, and look at the difference between sides there. And I found that's just as sensitive as the Nordic is for hammies, the leg extension is for quads. And same again, if you don't have that, you should hopefully have a handheld dynamometer. If you don't have that, a weighted single leg squat for reps is probably your next best thing you can do there. So that's how I like to measure strength in that mid to late stage.
And this mid to late stage we're talking about, this is like 3 months of like training basically. It is 12. Yeah. It's like, because the research has shown us it's around 9 months. You really don't want to be returning someone who's had a surgery before 9 months where possible, do you? So, I mean, you do have this good time to run at, like, you know, almost using it like a mini pre-season or something is how I like to frame it to say, hey, you know, we're going to build your endurance capabilities, build your just capacity, and then progress it as we're going along more into that strength, more into that power, keep on touching on that capacity stuff so it's not detraining, but kind of just using this as a pre-season to almost prepare you to be a better athlete than where you were.
I completely agree, mate. That mid to late stage ACL rehab, you should almost like walk into the gym, and if you saw someone, you should not be able to know if they're an ACL rehab client or just someone doing S&C. Like, it should look like that. That's how you sort of know. If you're fiddling around doing little mini balance exercises and little isolated stuff in that mid to late stage, you know you're probably not getting the best rehab you can be getting. So it really should just look like good progressive strength and conditioning in that sort of 4 to 9 month period, really. So it is like an LTAD, like long-term athletic development, or like a preseason, you know, welded into a 5 to 6 month period. So yeah, completely agree.
And the understanding still, it's at 9 months is where that kind of risk is at the lowest from your understanding still?
Yeah, so there's a paper that showed that between 6 and 9 months, for every month you waited, so from 6 to 7, 7 to 8, and 8 to 9, it helps like reduce injuries by 50% for ACLs. So it does seem like there is something to time being important, and I think that's just simply to do with the graft taking fully in the knee and the graft being as strong as possible, because you can't hurry that up. No matter what you do, you can't just go, okay, I'll just do some more squats and that'll help it. The graft has to take and has to develop strength and hold in the knee, and that is something that does just simply take time. So that's where that research is interesting, between 6 and 9. There is, and I know the NRL guys get them back sometimes around 6, 7, and 8. I guess you just have to accept that there is an element of rolling the dice a little bit more then, but they're in a situation that's completely unique. Like, these players are worth, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars to the club, and if the player's on the field, it might make a huge impact on the amount of money the club makes. So there's all these other factors that are involved there that we don't really need to worry about for even sort of semi-pro levels. Anything from there down, you shouldn't be, you know, compromising that 9 month point, in my opinion.
Yep. Anything there, Connor?
No, not at all. It's just, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I reckon the last thing, let's just chat from this kind of 9 month, this return to perform, this kind of chaos, like what type of percentages, leg symmetry index on different things you're looking, what tests, what your programming is really looking like, if really you are involved at all, or if they're just off doing their own thing and you're just checking in. So how's it kind of go there?
Yeah, look, it's I guess a takeaway from this is it really depends on who you're going to be working with throughout your ACL rehab process. Like, I'm a bit unique in that, like, I love taking someone from A to Z the whole way through, and I feel very confident in doing that. But often you're going to be working, you know, with a physio that might not be as good at that, or have the facilities to do proper late stage rehab and return to play work with you. So it really depends on who you're working with. If you've got a physio and an S&C, it's super important that they're on board with each other and they're still working together. The general approach is that in the early days, it's going to be more physio and less S&C. And then as you progress along the rehab, it should be, you know, more S&C and less physio, but never 0% and 100%. You're always going to have them both around at different times. So like we spoke about earlier, even at the very beginning of an ACL rehab, you want your S&C there to help you with programming for your upper body and for your other leg. And then even at the very, very end of rehab, you still want the physio to be there to just be checking on the integrity of the graft, if the knees handling all the load going through it, checking on any swelling and things like that, and just whether the actual joint is handling things well too. So it's never just completely one or the other. It's a big crossover. And so, that's going to determine, what sort of test you do with who. But for me, like I'll talk to you about what I do with people, and there's lots of different return to play tests that I do. But from what the research shows, we're looking for above 90% quad and hamstring limb symmetry index. I would prefer 100. I don't know why you wouldn't, but the research hasn't shown a difference between, and this hasn't been studied particularly well, so we can't really answer it. But the research hasn't really shown any lower, any higher risk of injury if you're below 90. That seems to be the cutoff point. But I still aim for 100 on both of those things. I then look at a bunch of hop tests too, as we all know. There's single hop, triple hop, crossover hop. But the other two that are really important are medial triple hop, which is an interesting one that is a bit of a newer one. So you're facing sideways and you're doing 3 hops across your body, still facing the same direction, and then you see how far you can get and stick it. And then also a 90-degree medial rotation hop. So you start facing sideways, you just hop and land facing 90 degrees to where you were facing before. So it's like you just do a little spin in the air and then you end up landing facing forward. And those two are super important to include, because the research has shown that those two that are a bit more lateral focused, a bit more rotational focused, they discriminate between people who've had an ACL versus having a lot better than the forwards hops, which makes sense. Like the knee's most challenged during lateral and rotational movements. So why not test it in your hop test, doing those more, plane specific tests too? So I wouldn't just stick to your traditional 3 forward ones that everyone does. I would be adding in the medial triple hop and the 90-degree rotational hop too. And then other things to look at that, aren't as often done, but things that need to be spoken about are like, you need to try to get, like, let's say the athlete has some kind of conditioning test that they did before the injury, and you have a baseline. You want them to be back at least the level they were before conditioning wise. Same for agility. If you're lucky enough that they have some kind of agility test data, or even if it's like a T test or something, trying to compare that to what it was before too. Other things that are also underrated are just psychosocial profiling too. So, you can do a return to sport index, psychological screen with an ACL client where they just go through and tick off how confident they are. And that in itself, like the research has sort of shown that correlates super well with their physical function, funnily enough. If someone doesn't feel confident and ready, it's likely that there's something physically, like there might be a reason behind that too. So that's another thing that I like to look at as well. But yeah, there's some of the key tests. So our limb symmetry index, hop tests, psychological tests, and then looking at any conditioning or agility scores that they had from before and seeing if they're back at 100% there too.
I know my favorite thing to do here is to like book them in for like an hour-long appointment, or if that's the model, if you're an appointment booking, or if you're in with the team. I want to spend a whole hour and I want to do the tests fresh, and then I want to get them through either like one of their performance, like a 1.2K, something like that, and then get them and test them again under that fatigued kind of area as well, and kind of compare if limb symmetry indexes stay the same. Like usually there's a drop in performance, like 5 to 10%, but I'm just looking more so for the limb symmetry indexes to stay the same or very, very similar anyway, under fatigue and under, and that's, I still haven't decided yet whether that's like do I hold them back from at least performance training or whatnot, or if that's just maybe we just get them to do less, less volumes of performance training or whatnot. I haven't really kind of got that far in my reasoning to be solid yet, but that's definitely something that I like to do as a measure myself there. Do you have any kind of thoughts or reasoning around that?
No, that's a good point. That's something that I didn't add, and it's something that very few people do is doing these same sort of tests, like your hop tests and your strength tests, in a fatigue state. Because what can happen is under fatigue that you can see a bigger difference in between sides than when fresh. And obviously when they're returning back to sport, they're going to be under fatigue, and you don't want things to deteriorate on the affected side more under fatigue compared to the other side, because then you're just going to be at a heightened risk of injury. So I think that's a great suggestion, mate. I would just take it, if someone does show a bigger difference under fatigue than when fresh, I would just take it as it means that we still got to just keep working on integration into training for a bit longer, just being a bit slower at building up what they're doing at training, and just to get more capacity work in there at training, just simply getting more volume of running, all those things ticked off before you go, okay, boom, you're unrestricted completely now at training. That's how I would take it. It's just, let's just not pull you back from doing things like, okay, you can't do that drill anymore, but let's perhaps just go a bit slower at integrating them back into training until those differences are, normalized. That's how I would go about it.
Yep. So you kind of the programming implication for that is you have them they're doing the full intensity task. You might be titrating up the volume. So you might hold back a bit of volume, titrate that up, but they might be doing some extra kind of rehab or just like extra kind of strength or endurance focus or whatever work on top of that to make sure that you're kind of getting that capacity up or what?
Yeah. So if they're not getting enough, like if they're not getting enough out of what you're allowing them to do at training, then you need to do top ups. But if someone is like, let's say someone is 3/4 integrated back into training, then there's going to be less top ups needed than someone who's only doing half of what's happening at training, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
You definitely don't want them going backwards. If you're like, okay, I'm only happy with you doing these 3 drills, and there's like, that's like a third of the training session. And if they only do that, they're going to probably go backwards a little bit in terms of their capacity. So yeah, you should use top ups as needed, depending on how much they're doing at training. And I find that, if there is that drop off in limb symmetry index under fatigue, it just means that their capacity isn't quite there yet. So the more running you get them doing, the more top ups, so that you build them up to, similar volumes of running as what everyone else is doing at training. Once they're at that point, I reckon you'd be far less likely to have a drop off in limb symmetry index under fatigue than when someone's only done like half the running volume that everyone else is doing. You're more likely to see it happening at that point. So yeah,
should those top ups be specific to the to the task that you found that there has been an issue with, or just general prep stuff?
So for me, the way I use top ups, it really depends on what are they getting from the drills that you have allowed them to do at training. So let's say the drills you're allowing them to do at training are really low change of direction, just a bit more straight line skill work, not too much of that. Then, okay, I want my top ups to be, this agility stuff that we know is absolutely crucial for an ACL. But let's say that they're a bit further along the path and you're allowing them to do a bit more change of direction and agility type drills, but it's just the total amount of running that you're not happy with them doing yet. Then the top ups you're going to do is like, okay, let's do a bit more straight line to top you up, but not as much as what the other guys are doing in the total session. But no point doing more agility stuff then, because you've just done a couple of small-sided games or something. So it really just is, what are they getting from the drills you allow them to do at training? And then what do they still need to work on to be meeting all the things they're going to have to do in a full training session? And again, it's just about bridging the gap between those two things.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, I like that. And then anything with specific, say like if it's say you found the quads just under fatigue, there, like would you get them to do some post session like quad burners or something just to fatigue or anything like that? Or is that kind of pushing the capacity too much? You think that you might get like a negative adaptation?
Yeah, like it really depends on the limb symmetry index and when they're displaying that drop in strength. If it's just even in fresh conditions, their limb symmetry index is still like 85, 90. I want to hammer them fresh and just get them as strong as possible, But if it's like, let's say it's 95, 100 fresh, and then it drops to 80% under fatigue, then I'm going to do their strength work under fatigue. Yeah. So it really just depends. Make it specific to what you see.
Yep. No, that's really good. That's kind of what I was thinking, just to get out of that point there as well for people. It's that specificity principle kind of rings true there as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Anything you got to cover there, Connor?
No, nothing. Just kind of a wrap-up question from me would be: how do you know that your rehab, and how do you know that everything you've done has been successful? Like, what is a successful return to play? I know it's a hard question to ask. Is it like 6 months without an injury, and that was just like another freak accident, or when do you start to attribute that what you did wasn't enough?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a tricky one to answer. I think if we look at it from a actually returning back to your first game type situation, if the athlete sort of tells you things like, yeah, I wasn't really even thinking about my knee, and post game there's no massive increase in pain or swelling or anything, like they're just like, oh yeah, it's like a little bit sore, and that's normal because whenever you do something for the first time ever, that's standard practice. That there's going to be some kind of little response in the knee. But if the person tells you that, like, yeah, I felt great out there, I wasn't thinking about my knee, there's no real problems in the days after, and they just do that consecutively week after week, and they just like, you almost don't really hear from them, and they're just like enjoying themselves in that training, and they go a whole season with no problems, and like that's your ideal situation. If someone goes back to sport and you can see that they're tentative, they're not performing well at all, like the coach comes up to you and goes, yeah, like, he's not the player he used to be. They're the sorts of things you don't want to be hearing. And that's maybe a sign that you haven't returned them back to performance. And that's the sort of the difference between return to play and return to performance is, are they back at where they were? And if the coach is happy with them, the player's not thinking about it, they're not having any real symptoms, and they're killing it out there, and that happens for a whole full season, like I would say that's a successful return to sport. Obviously, with ACLs, we know that re-injury is a funny thing. Like, it's not, you can do everything perfectly, right, in an ACL rehab, and then, for example, they can have a contact injury, and it's nothing you could have done about. So you can't judge yourself at all in that situation. But it's also important to remember there's certain patients out there that have these biomechanical or anatomical risk factors in their knee that just mean that they are more predisposed to ACLs. And it happens at the elite of the elite level. How's the Swans player? That Swan, I've forgotten his name.
Yeah.
Who's done his ACL, like, what is it, 8 times or something absurd? Like, and he's getting the best rehab possible, right? It's at the Swans, and he's still done it. So you can't, like, let's say someone, because I've had that happen with a couple of my guys, and one of them is a guy who's had like 6 surgeries on his knee, and like for him, unfortunately, clearly his knee just isn't up to the task. Unfortunately, like no matter what he's done, every different surgery hasn't worked out for him, all the rehab. So you gotta be able to hold your head high and not be too hard on yourself if there are certain people where things are more out of your control.